everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexi. This episode continues our season looking at modern retellings of the Iliad and the Odyssey, ancient epics known for both brutal violence and instances of sexual assault. This episode is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snack ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story. So, we are talking about Ithaca, a novel of Homer's Odyssey by Patrick Dillon. This may be the novel that makes me like Telemachus.
Really?
Yeah! I think he's a much more sympathetic character.
He is more sympathetic, but
you don't like
I
him
don't know.
still.
We can get into that as we analyze this then. Put it that way. We can do more analyzing of him. But yeah, why don't you recap it for us?
Yeah, so we read up until chapter 10, and the majority of what we read is from Telemachus' point of view. And it starts when Odysseus has been away for, 16 years, maybe?
This is one of my big problems with this book, actually. I'll get right into it. The chronology is all over the place in a way that I'm not used to, because we usually know how it works. But he said something like really, not disturbing, that's the wrong word, but just like confusing, because he was like, at one point he said, oh yes, the war in Troy. They were actually gone for 8 years. Oh, but people round up to 10, it's more poetic, but 8 years. So I'm like, no, I'm like, the original, the Iliad takes place in like year 9. I was like, what? This automatic? No. So that really took me out. So I think in this chronology, he was gone for 8 years at the war, and so he's been missing for,
I think, another 8. I think Telemachus
is it another 8?
Is around 16. Yeah,
okay,
I think.
So
we start when it's Telemachus. We don't get anything from Odysseus' point of view, or even Odysseus coming up as a character, until chapter 8.
You see him, but you don't hear from him. But I have a feeling, just by the way it's being written, I feel like either it's going to shift to in-person him in chapter 10, or someone who listens to him.
Mm-hmm. So the first, third, I guess, that we read is Telemachus describing, kind of takes you from how Odysseus left and he wasn't even born yet, and then he remembers his childhood growing up and how in the early years it was nice and fun, and they had this beautiful home, and his mother was well respected and like really in control of the situation, and they went on picnics and it was just idyllic. It sounds wonderful. And then he describes how these men start showing up, and they just happen to be sailing past Ithaca. Just thought they'd check in, see how Penelope's doing, and they kind of make small talk with the child, who is Telemachus, and then they all end with, is your mother around? Which I found quite comical. But it describes how the situation goes from these men being there as respected guests with a mutual respect, right? Like respecting their hostess and being decent human beings, to quite literally killing each other in the courtyard, which is horrific. And after the death of one of the suitors, and they're fighting over one of the maidservants, Telemachus is told that one of the suitors is in his mother's chambers. And he races upstairs and is just completely unable to do anything physically. He says, I tried attacking this guy before and he just threw me aside, so I can't fight. And he tries to like persuade him out with his words, and eventually one of the other suitors comes up and is just, what are you doing in here? Get out. We don't come in here. So it was very interesting, and very early on there's this dichotomy set up between what Telemachus sees as how men should be, which is this fighter warrior type person. His house is full of them. All of the suitors seem to fit into this archetype. The men on Ithaca typically are fishermen and merchants. They're not this kind of person, but he views his father as being this like heroic fighter, and he's not, because there's been no one to teach him. So he feels deeply inadequate and like he doesn't match up to his father. And there are at least 2 points where he's told by people he doesn't look like Odysseus at all. He looks like Penelope. And you can tell that there's this kind of shame almost that he is the son of the great heroic Odysseus, but he doesn't look like him. He can't fight. How are they similar? And then as the story progresses, people tell him, oh, you're clever like your dad. You're good with your words like your dad. Oh, Odysseus was a liar. And that just throws his whole world into turmoil, because he starts to realize his father is not this infallible hero warrior that he's grown up daydreaming about. He's the Odysseus that we all know and sometimes love. And he lies, he tells stories, and he goes around each person he meets who knew Odysseus. He says, tell me about my father. What kind of man was he? And the people of Ithaca are not super happy about him. It's like, well, he was the chief. That's all I'm going to say about that. He was the chief. And then at the town meeting, people rail against him because he took their sons away and never came back again. And they don't much care if he comes back. He's, as far as they're concerned, dead. And then Nestor explains that he wasn't so much a liar, just like a teller of tales. And Telemachus is like, well, yes, is that not the same thing, maybe? So yes, it's all very interesting. And then you meet Polycast, who is Nestor's daughter. Whole interesting thing there that I'm sure we'll get into. She travels with Telemachus to Sparta by themselves, unsupervised, unchaperoned. She teaches him to wrestle.
Quote unquote.
Yes, quite. And there's like a frisson of sexual tension, and he gets super scared and just stares right past her, and she tells him that he's very sweet. Which, I mean, sure, he's not like throwing himself at her. He probably is quite sweet. The whole their unsupervised part of the story, because it's not even as though they leave Nestor with guards who are somehow killed or something on the way. No, they leave to go and find someone who is supposed to then accompany them to Sparta. He is apparently sick, so they just keep going. There was no supervision to begin with, which runs contrary to everything I do understand about ancient Greece, specifically royal women in ancient Greece. But I digress. And then they get to Sparta and meet Menelaus, and he's fascinating and bombastic and this huge personality who is like clearly a massive sadist, and tells them about all of the marvelous things that he brought back from Troy. And this is Priam's shield and Hector's breastplate, and this I cut off the body of whoever. I was like, wow, charming. Then Helen shows up, as she would do, and they have a very passive-aggressive marital argument, with Helen telling them how she hated being in Troy and wanted nothing more than to come home, and how wonderful it was to see Odysseus when he snuck into Troy, and she just wanted him to take her home again and see her beloved husband. You can like hear the violins swelling in the background. And then Menelaus is getting progressively more and more angry and drunk as she tells this story, and essentially says, you're lying. You know you're lying. I know you're lying. Now everyone is going to know you're lying, because actually what happened was, when the Trojan horse was wheeled into the city, you told Paris that we can't trust it because it's Odysseus and we can't trust Odysseus. And Helen says, oh, he's just playing. He knows I love it when he makes these jokes. Actually, I was being threatened by Paris to tell him all about the Trojan horse. It wasn't my fault at all. And then the kids, Telemachus and Polycast, just go to bed. Fair enough. I think I'd have escaped that situation as soon as humanly possible. And then Telemachus is just kind of up wandering randomly, and here's Menelaus and Helen having a proper matrimonial argument, which was just like very, very unsettling. But that was interesting because we get afterwards a discussion between Telemachus and Polycast about Helen. And Polycast is like, she's an awful, vain, horrible person. She's the cause of so many deaths. I have zero sympathy for her. And Telemachus is like, it's not that simple. Interesting. Very interesting. So that was enjoyable. But then they go with Menelaus to a mountain somewhere, and an Egyptian priest that Menelaus maybe kidnapped from Egypt, who knows, and brought home, goes into this trance vision thing to ask if Odysseus is in the underworld, and he's not. Hooray! So then they're like, okay, well, what do we do now? And Telemachus tells Polycus, well, I'm going back to Ithaca. I'm going to build a tomb for my father, and my mother's going to marry someone. And she says, but he's not dead. Odysseus isn't dead. And Telemachus is like, well, what evidence do we have? We have no one who's seen him. We have this half-mad Egyptian priest who says he didn't see him in the underworld, which is great, but it's not exactly something I can take home to my mother and say, have hope. It's fine. Father will be home in a fortnight. It's not how that works. So that's kind of where you finish the Telemachus narrative, and then it picks up with Nausicaa, who is hilarious. She's just completely not what I was expecting, and she's hilarious. And she seems very much like your flighty 15-year-old boy mad teenage girl, which I enjoyed in this historical context. I thought that was very clever. And she's saying about how she doesn't like any of the men because they're all weavers and accountants, and she has no interest in weavers and accountants, and she wants a warrior and a man's man and someone covered in scars. And lo and behold, Odysseus washes up on her beach, and she is just over the moon and completely gaga over him. And her father is less than thrilled because he is an accountant, and his wife is very happy weaving next to her accountant king husband, and he doesn't want anything to do with these fighters, because actually what they do is they go off and they kill normal men like himself. I wouldn't be a fan of that either. So there's this random old man washed up on the beach covered in scars, clearly a fighter, has claimed like guest friendship status, so can't really do anything. And they're in the dining hall. There's like little bits and pieces about how Odysseus essentially just lies around and sleeps, which, okay, fair play. He's been drifting in the ocean for God knows how long and has had quite the epic voyage, but it was not the behavior I was expecting from the fabled Odysseus. And then they're in the banqueting hall, and one of the bards sings the song of Odysseus. Odysseus starts crying because he's Odysseus, and this is deeply traumatic for him. And then we finished reading just as he kind of introduces himself for the first time. I am from Ithaca, my name is Odysseus. And then it's like, oh, I didn't read further. I was quite tempted to, but I did not. So I don't know if what happens next is we switch to Odysseus' perspective, or we stick with Nausicaa, or what happens. Yeah. That was a lot.
Yeah, but that's why I have you do the recaps, because you deliver them so well.
I just go for it.
You just go for it. That's what we're here for. And I think that's what our audience is here for. They want to hear you just go on and be like, what is this book about? Go. Yeah, there's so much to dig into, because like it's the story we know, but it's, a slightly different. But the thing is, they're not trying to. He didn't reinvent the wheel, right? So he's not like telling us anything new per se. And again, it's hard to really dig in to the proper Odyssey part, because it ends before we're even going to actually get into the Odyssey. So I'm like, oh, great. I know. I got to the reveal and I was like, no, really? You're going to end here? Seriously? This is so stupid. But okay. So yeah, I wanted to go on, but I didn't either. So we will discover that. But at least for I'll start with the shorter part with Nausicaa, just because we only had 2 chapters with her. So it's easier to start there, and I'll work backwards, which is kind of a weird thing, but I'll do it. Well, one, they changed her name because I thought her name was Nausicaa, like the Miyazaki Nausicaa, but this dude was like Nausicaa, and I was like, this throws me off. So now I don't know what is actually her name.
I think that's a cultural pronunciation difference again.
Maybe. Okay. Well, what we got was pouty teenage girl, which we were both once, and I remember that time in my life, and I'm like, well, I wasn't quite as boy crazy as I think they portrayed her, but I will say I related very deeply to I want a warrior, because I went through a phase when I was like 17 or something where I was like, I only want to date or marry a soldier because damn, they look good in a uniform, and that's all I care about. I don't care about anything else. I just want to take pictures with them in uniform because damn, that's sexy. So I deeply, deeply related to that. But I also deeply related to the father of they go and kill people in a foreign country. I don't want this. So yeah, that was interesting. That was kind of fun. But I guess I liked her also because she really, I mean, I'm not reading the physical copy, so I can't say she danced off the page per se, but she
Yeah.
danced off the page and out of the audiobook. And you know what? She reminded me of the Nausicaa from the Kirk Douglas Ulysses we watched, because she was
Yeah.
also like really, I'm young and look, I'm going to call you Stenos and you're like older and handsome and I'm amazed by you and I just must like be married to you. And I was like, oh honey, but you're so young. I mean, in that one she was like young and frilly and she had the cake on her head thing, the cake hat. And I was like, yes, she's just like her. So that marrying the kind of interpretations I think was quite amazing. And I will say, yeah, I'm excited to see kind of where the story shifts, whether we are going to get a first person Odysseus or if maybe, although we've done first person Odysseus, so I'm kind of like, I kind of hope that it sticks with Nausicaa and we hear the tale of Odysseus through her eyes, because I'd love to see what her teenage brain thinks of all of his exploits, because that would read kind of like a diary of epic proportions. So working backward, I guess, yeah, Telemachus, also chronology issue. So he literally says, my father left me and I was not born, I was in my mother's womb. And I'm like, but Odysseus left when his son was like an infant, because you have the whole mythology of he tried to pretend to be insane and almost plowed his son in a field when they were testing him to see if he was actually crazy and would kill his child. So again, I think my biggest issue is just chronology, because I'm like, but because they're not straying far enough from the original source material that it would make real sense to me, at least. I mean, maybe to other people it's like such a subtle small thing. I mean, it doesn't really change the actual story that much, but I just found it, I guess, distracting as we know, a Homer purist, where I'm like, no, no, no. These are we know these stories and we have a firm timeline. So please don't make major changes.
I don't wonder if it's only a 2-year difference, but I think it changes it from Telemachus being like a young man already to him still being a child. Because there are several of the older male characters saying essentially like, I can't talk to you like this, you're not a grown man, you're still a kid, which I think does add a bit of a nuance to Telemachus, his situation and how he's handling it.
That's true. And I guess it does play into here. I have notes. I have many notes that I wrote down in a fury. So as I refer to my notes, I wrote down that I really like the concept of the story and the idea that Telemachus is a young 16-year-old boy and not this sort of like brutal, vengeful kind of boy who you would kind of expect being raised in the environment with all the suitors just kind of around and taking advantage of his father's estate, but also just, he could have grown up to be bitter. Like, my daddy's gone and he hasn't come back and everyone's back, so now I'm really bitter. So I do like how it adds to like, it's totally believable that a 16-year-old would kind of be quote unquote soft, like a woman like his mother, because it does really illustrate how he grew up without a father. So no one ever taught him to fight. No one ever taught him to do anything. He is really kind of like weak and sad, which makes me sad. But again, I like that for what the story is. But I would also say, again, as my notes say, there's a bit of a disconnect, though, because I found that with him being so young, I found like kind of his early journey so far, just at least to, see Nestor and then going to Sparta. It was kind of uneventful as a journey. And I think I was looking for more like adventuring type, following your daddy's footsteps. But I don't know, and tell me if you feel this way, but, and I wrote down in big bold letters, this is a very character and like theme driven story and not a plot driven one, which is kind of a big difference. But that difference would then also account for the lack of like action adventure, because if you're really trying to tell a story about a character, it doesn't really matter what happens to them, just the growth that they get out of going and doing and listening.
I think it's definitely a character driven thing. And I think what we're going to end up with is a Telemachus who at the beginning glorified his father as a heroic warrior who has, through his journey, shown that actually he has the skills, like the intelligence, the cunning, maybe the people skills that you see in Odysseus elsewhere, and I suspect that you'll see in Odysseus when he comes more fully into this novel. So I think it's very much looking at personal growth and development, and probably, having not finished the book, a young boy's kind of journey towards seeing his father as an actual human being. I mean, it's difficult, right? Because it's a father that he's never known, but seeing him as a rounded 3D real human being, and not someone that he can never measure up to because he's not this great fighter. And actually, his father has a lot more in common with him than he realizes, like, having never met him.
I think it's true. I guess to me, this book really makes me think that they're going the route that the Netflix Troy Fall of a City did, which is like where that strove to turn a normally just sort of bloodthirsty rah-rah Achilles into like the philosopher king type. I think this is kind of doing the same for Telemachus, where they definitely try to make him thoughtful. And I hope that we get the reunion when Odysseus comes home. And then instead of just because we're so used to just seeing, father and son find each other, and then he goes, "Yes, father, I will help you kill the suitors. Ha 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 ha. We will plan." And then they just like go around and kill the suitors. And there's not really a lot of personality in there other than, "Father, I found you, so I will follow you." So I'm hoping that from this character-driven development, we'll get things roll around in his brain, and whether he has any moral qualms. And I know they set it up, and just the story, the way it is, like, it's not really set up to make you have pity for any of the suitors. I mean, here he is, a 16-year-old boy, and he doesn't like that suitors are way trespassing the guest friendship. They're killing each other. They're trying to get to his mother. But like, I think that if they were going to go with this more philosophical version of him, they're going to have to do some sort of, well, I didn't like them, but they were in my home and they were around, so that did have an impact on me. So to just like kill them without any kind of reflection or feeling, it's going to be interesting. And I also just enjoyed his description of Antinous, obviously the lead suitor, as having the small round eyes or whatever, and the mean face, and it just read like a diary entry of a 16-year-old boy that he would write in his journal, like, "And he was so mean to me, and his fat little mean face."
It was really interesting though, because he's like sitting in Penelope's chambers in his like dressing gown, essentially. And Telemachus describes how you can like see his chest hair, and he's just sitting there staring at his mother, and it's kind of gross. It really is. And you find out later, because when Telemachus is recounting essentially his life story to Polycast, you find out that he's had to listen to these men speak about his mother in ways that you don't want to hear men speak about your mother. And then on his birthday, they dressed him up in her clothes and made him sing to them. And it's not pleasant, not pleasant.
But it was funny. The line that was read, it was hilarious. "And one day I caught the suitors speaking about my mother in a way where it was very uncomfortable. So I decided that maybe I should just get up and leave." And I was like, I love how it was so nonchalant. It wasn't even, "How dare they disrespect." It was just, I'm a little uncomfortable, so I'm gonna just peace out. Yeah, and then go talk to like Euryclea and be away. And I was like, dude. It manages to still weave in humor, and I was not expecting that, because it is kind of just a depressing story of a missing father and a poor woman besieged in a son who's kind of got a target on his back, so you don't really expect a lot of humor. Honestly, the whole thing is a freaking Greek tragedy, just with sappy woman waiting for her husband, and he's off being a philanderer and all these things, and poor little boy. So yeah, humor. I was like, it's funny. It's funny. I would say, what was your favorite section so far?
It's a weird choice, but really early on in the book, Telemachus goes to the shrine, local shrine on the mountain. And the way it's described is really, really evocative. And it's like a cave carved into the mountainside, and it's shrouded in like trailing plants. And inside it is dark and smoky and stinks of like rancid meat and rotting food, because obviously when you leave offerings to the gods, one of the things you can leave is food. And one of the things that is a regular occurrence is like blood sacrifices. You sacrifice an animal and the gods get the best parts. And it's something that I'd not really thought about. And in Mesopotamia, at least, it's kind of understood that the gods are given their offerings, and then maybe the priests eat the offerings. But the idea of having it just sitting there and slowly decaying was very interesting. And then it's like this dark, smoky cave, and it smells horrible. And it just, the way it was described was so convincing. I really kind of got a feeling for the space in a way that I don't always with space in novels. It was really thoughtfully described, and there are offerings everywhere, and then there's this interaction with the priest there, who is clearly very dismissive, rude about the idea of Odysseus coming back. And Penelope has been leaving offerings, very precious offerings, in a chest that she's had purpose built to hold all of this hope, like material hope, that her husband will survive and then come home again, was really like tragic, just absolutely tragic. And then the very last bit, he asks to see the offerings that Odysseus himself left, and one of them is this small carved owl, obviously symbol of Athena, but Telemachus tells us that it was kind of set aside from the rest of them, and no one really knows why his father left it, and it's been a bit of a mystery. And then as he's leaving to get on the boat to go and find Odysseus, a random girl from the town runs up to him and gives him an identical owl and says, "You have to find him." And he's like, "Who are you?" "Ah, sure, I will find my father. Why do you have this?" But she's gone. And Polycast, when he tells her this story, she says, "Well, obviously your dad had a mistress. This is just kind of how royal dudes worked. There was a mistress. That girl is your half sister." So that was, interesting. And I'm keen to see if she pops up again. I assume she does, because it's an odd thing to include as like a throwaway thing. So I'm assuming she'll pop up again, and that there'll be some more extended scene, like maybe it's a point of contention with Telemachus and Odysseus. I don't know. It will be, I'm saying the word interesting a lot, but it will be interesting to see how that one plays out, because Telemachus, the way he describes his mother, is a woman who is a shell of her former self, and she is suffering and has suffered and is essentially like almost going mad, I think, from loneliness. So the idea, the revelation that his father not only has been, having pleasant dalliances with random goddesses across the Aegean, but also has a mistress in the town, probably is not going to sit terribly well with him. So, yeah, we shall see about that one. What did you like?
I honestly love when they get to Sparta, and I love the interactions with Menelaus and especially Helen, because I don't think any of the adaptations, either Iliad or Odyssey, that we've looked at so far has had Telemachus have any interaction with Helen, which would make sense. I don't know why you'd include it really, because the original two epics don't have that. So it's kind of a delightful extra bonus. But I just love when he like first meets her and you get this description where he was like, initially he didn't know what to expect and he's very curious, like any 16-year-old boy would be. I mean, because anyone who knows 16-year-old boys are probably going to be like, yeah, what kind of woman, like how hot do you have to be to make 1,000 ships go get you and fight a 8 to 10 year war? Like, I mean, she's got to be pretty hot or pretty interesting, have a great personality. Although I don't think 16-year-old boys really care, unfortunately, about your personality. But, I'm going out on a limb because I do not have a 16-year-old boy. So if I'm wrong, sue me. I just love how when he finally sees her, what you get is this amazing, just amazing descriptive information where she was more breathtaking than I could have expected. And I love how he went into the detail of, oh, and her voice when she started speaking had this like seductive quality that makes me want to do anything to defend her. So you sort of understand from a 16-year-old brain without any of the nuance that you're like, so she's fucking hot and her voice apparently is like the most alluring voice that you've ever heard or will hear. So I'm also, because I'm like a very auditory and visual person, I'm kind of like, so how sexy does this voice have to be? Because I pay attention to like the sexiness of people's voices. I don't know. It's like a weird thing because I just, so I'm like, okay, so can I compare this to like what modern actors or people do I know? Is this like a Scarlett Johansson voice coming from like the movie Her, right? Where you're like, damn, her voice is sexy as hell, and she's a fucking computer, but like I'm in love too. That's a whole nother story for another day because I have thoughts on ScarJo's voice in Her because shit, man, damn it. Anyway, yes. So that was like great because that brought up all this like stuff for me and I loved it. And then their marital fight. And then I loved how it rehashes the themes that I was curious in and I'm always curious in for the Iliad stuff. I mean, so when you listen to the first half of our big mega season 1, all we talk about is this narrative of, okay, but was Helen kidnapped or did she go willingly? How does that change the story? Does it change the story? So what I love is her when she's trying to like make and concoct this lie for everyone else. I love how she does lean into the Paris is awful and he stole me away from my husband and my home. Interestingly enough, she does not talk about her children. She does not say I was stolen away and my daughter Hermione was left here, but okay, fine, oversight, whatever. You can't have everything you want, but I found it really interesting how she did bring up the I was stolen aspect, and that's why she missed home and all this stuff that she's basically fabricating. And so the dynamic was fantastic. But I also love that when he was eavesdropping on their proper marital fight, you get the I would have, give up everything for one night with Paris because this is horrible. And
I'd take one night with Paris over a lifetime with you. I'm like, holy fuck. Okay.
I was like, she's salty, man. She's so salty. But I loved it. So I think just because I like things that lean into the humor, if you're going to put that into something that's really serious, it's got to be humor done right. And to me, this is humor done excellently, but manages to also capture deeper themes that we've tried to analyze. And yeah, I think that was my favorite so far. That was a lot.
That whole interaction between Helen and Menelaus, it's like threateningly funny. It's amusing because you've got them essentially telling two different stories, ostensibly to their guests, but really having this very passive aggressive fight. But you could kind of feel the threat and the aggression slowly increasing as they keep going until they're actually screaming at each other after everyone else has gone to bed. It was funny, but it was unsettling at the same time.
Definitely not a comfortable place. I mean, because if we're uncomfortable as readers, how uncomfortable is Telemachus when he's like at the door, like I hear this.
I'm trapped in this house.
Yeah, I would give anything to just leave. So I should maybe just leave, please. So yeah, I really like that part. The Nestor part was fun, but not as fun. But I also thought it was fun that Telemachus even goes to see Nestor, because you don't expect that.
It was nice to see Nestor. I'm still a bit confused as to what Polycast is doing. Just generally in the story. Obviously, she's kind of being set up as a love interest, except she's a love interest who, from her own mouth, has zero interest in being a love interest. Like, she's learned how to fight because she refuses to be taken off as a war captive like the Trojan women were. She kind of hates all of the warrior culture. It really makes her feel deeply unsafe, and she doesn't like it. And Telemachus feels very keenly that he should be a warrior. He feels less because he is not a warrior. So how that relationship, friendship, whatever it is we're looking at, is going to resolve, or even if it goes anywhere at all, because where we leave it, Polycast is going back to Pylos, and Telemachus is heading home to Ithaca. And for all that Nestor sent his unaccompanied teenage daughter to Sparta with another teenager, very strange. For all that happened, I can't necessarily see her just gallivanting off to Ithaca without, going home and telling her father first, or, getting an armed guard or something. So, yes.
The lack of chaperone really stood out, because I was just like, what in the... what? Is that... Yeah. So I was like, oh, okay. It's funny because when they did say, like, there's no chaperone, again, because I just am a casual... No, let's be real. I'm a fanatic lover and watcher of many different types of films. I immediately, my brain went right to, have you seen, what is it called? Corpse Bride.
Yeah.
Okay. You know that scene where Johnny Depp's character Victor is with his bride-to-be Victoria, and they're like playing the piano and they're like talking, and then suddenly, as they're like having a moment, the mother comes in with that fantastic voice actress, and she's like, what in the world is this without a chaperone? That clicked into my brain.
That's very much how I felt. Where is your chaperone? What is going on here?
That scene like clicked into my mind with that actress's voice, and I was like,
young lady, go to your room.
Oh god, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. I was pseudo trying to like cast this book as a film, putting in my favorite actors. Let's be real. But I do that with half the stuff I read. I really, really, really wish that Christopher Lee was still with us, because I really wanted him to be Nestor. Like, really wanted him to be Nestor. Helen is supposed to be hot with the seductive voice, and well, because my mind went right to ScarJo in her, I was like, it's gotta be ScarJo, obviously. Love her so much.
I feel like she'd do the passive-aggressive thing very well also.
Oh, she would totally do the passive-aggressive thing. I mean, I was also kind of basing it off of her performance as Black Widow in a lot of the Marvel films, because like her interactions with Captain America are like golden, and she's not afraid to mince words and like do the uncomfortable thing. So yeah, she would be a great Helen. Who did I have as, you know what, I absolutely just love, what's his name, who plays Menelaus from the Brad Pitt Troy. To me, he's my favorite Menelaus.
I don't remember his name, but he'd be a fantastic Menelaus for this.
Brian Gleeson? I think it's Brian Gleeson. Big, tall, Scottish, I think, actor. I love him. He's great. I mean, honestly, the guy, both Agamemnon and Menelaus in the Brad Pitt Troy are the most perfect casting choices, and I want to see them in everything. Yeah. I don't know who would be Telemachus. That was the one I was kind of waffling over. I mean, I was kind of like maybe like a Timothy Chalamet kind of thing, because he's got that just like youthful face type thing. Because the thing is, it's like also, since he's being described as kind of like on the prettier side, the softer features, where he's not like he's not young, he's not like buff, and so you can't cast like a muscly young guy. He's very slight in my mind, and yeah, Timothy Chalamet just kind of fits the bill, which is also why I think he's fantastic in Dune, because he is this sort of slight, small, not traditional, just, you know. So maybe, you know what? Maybe I will say Timothy Chalamet is my Telemachus. I don't know. Who do you cast? I'm so curious.
I don't tend to cast novels when I read them, but I do like your casting choices very much. I don't have any better suggestions. I'm trying to think who I'd do for Nausicaa, but I'm not sure.
You can just say the actress from Ulysses, because she was good.
That's true.
Or you know what? Actually, I'm connecting this Nausicaa to Nausicaa from Miyazaki's film. The voice actress who voices Nausicaa, Alison Lohman, has that perfect, like, super high pitched, sort of naive young lady sound. I mean, obviously in Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, she is required to sort of put a little more grit into some of the scenes where she's supposed to be the tough, courageous young lady, but when she's not busy being the tough princess ordering people around, I mean, her voice actress is fantastic. It's like the perfect Nausicaa voice. I'm going to go with Alison Lohman, I think. So for anyone who wants to know who this is, watch Miyazaki's film Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, the English dub, because that is Alison Lohman, and she's like got the perfect voice for
also
young princess.
One of the only animated movies with cuneiform in it. Oh no, it's not Valley of the Wind, it's Castle in the Sky.
Yeah, because I was going to say, no, it's
Wrong
Castle
one.
in the Sky.
Yeah, no, Castle in the Sky. Different film entirely.
But equally fantastic. Everyone should watch all the Miyazaki films. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a similar vibe. Just it doesn't have cuneiform, unfortunately, but similar vibe.
More things should have cuneiform in them. I'm waiting for
everything
an Odyssey adaptation with more cuneiform. I'm going to be waiting a while, I think.
If I asked you, Megan, I'm pretty sure I could be like, Megan, go through everything that could or should or is connected to cuneiform in some way, and you're going to give me like a list, and it's just going to be endless.
There are certainly some. It was in the new Dark Crystal series that I actually didn't watch, but that's a Netflix one. They've got cuneiform in there. There's also a couple of Doctor Who episodes with cuneiform in. The Orient Express episode has what looks like a military standard. I think it has a king name on. I think it's Gudea or something similar. Yeah.
I want to say, did Tales of Earthsea have cuneiform in it? Or no, that was some other random language.
I haven't actually seen that one.
Okay. Well, it's not Miyazaki. It was Miyazaki's son who did that one, and it was 2006, I believe. Although you should watch it anyway, because Mariska Hargitay is one of the characters, and I was like, I love Mariska, so yay, Mariska.
I really like that book as well anyway, so.
Yeah. Well, everything Miyazaki is just brilliant and amazing, and yes, for you listeners, if you're curious, I will try to find a reason for us to review any of the Miyazaki films, because, well, I want to.
Really, who needs an excuse to watch them again?
I know, right? Well, they're all based in like some kind of mythology and have gods, and you know what? If we looked really deep, we'd find all kinds of like Japanese mythology, and I would be into doing a season on Japanese inspired things. So just to make us watch all the Miyazaki films. I'm into it. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I guess the book is pretty short from my understanding. Obviously, I don't have the physical copy. I have the audiobook, but I read up to chapter 10 and there's only 20 chapters. So, I mean, we kind of blew through the half.
Yeah, it's definitely on the shorter side. The print version is, I think, around 260 odd pages, but it's quite large print and very widely spaced. So I don't think you're really getting 260 pages worth of novel that you might have if it was in a more traditional type font and size.
Yeah, I think we've gotten everything from the first half. So I'll say, what are you looking forward to in the second half? Things you want to see? I don't know, anything.
Interested to see how Telemachus reacts to his father coming home, whether this mysterious girl, possibly a daughter of Achilles, possibly not, really, who knows, comes into play, like if she's actually a significant character. And also interested to see how the confrontation with the suitors goes, because the Telemachus we have, I do not see senselessly slaughtering a whole bunch of people. Odysseus doesn't seem to be terribly emotionally stable from what we've seen. Again, we've had one chapter and a few pages with him in. He's done very little except lie around, eat a lot, and then cry violently. So not sure how that's going to go, but it will be an adventure to find out. What are you looking for in particular?
I think also the confrontation with the suitors, because now we have a philosophical boy, and reuniting with your father does not make him a warrior because he can't make up for all those trainings. So it's like what happens when you have a 16-year-old boy who has never learned to fight and is kind of described as being weak. I don't really see him taking a very I mean, the suitors will get slaughtered because since it seems to be following the Odyssey, there's no way in which they don't. But I'm very curious to see if this is very much like I'll help you plan and get you in, but then Dad, you take over and kill everyone because I can't. So I wonder if it's going to be handled in a way where he can't physically do it, or it's he can't also mentally do it because he's more philosophical. So I'm really interested in seeing that. The reunion of the family after the suitors are murdered, I'm really interested to see, just because the Penelope from this one is a little more, I don't want to say basic, but like other adaptations have done a bit more with her. This one is not. I mean, for obvious reasons, I guess it's from the son's perspective and self-discovery of himself and his father, and he's worried about all these other things, so we don't really have a reason to get a lot from her. Interested to see how their reunion goes. And I think someone I spoke to who had read the book said, "Oh, be prepared. There's a fun sort of plot twist at the end, a fun little take." And so that made me just very curious as to.
I'm always down for a fun plot.
Right. So I'm like, I don't know what kind of plot twist that you would have, but maybe it does involve the girl, right?
He woke up and it was all a dream.
Oh gosh. Yeah, we would be getting very Walking Dead on it, right? Although they did say the whole thing was not a figment of Rick's imagination, and he's not going to wake up in his hospital bed, unfortunately. So they would have to do something really drastic. But yeah, I guess, final thoughts are that's what I'm excited for. I also am. I didn't think they would include the gods in this. Again, they're hard to do. They don't really show up. And if they do show up, it would be at the end because he wouldn't really and like there's just, even in the original, it's like Athena comes to him and says, okay, only I will disguise your father and only you will recognize him. But I don't really expect the gods to turn up because it would be a bit random for this adaptation. But yeah, and I'm honestly just curious to see how they handle the retelling of what Odysseus has been up to, and I hope it's not from his perspective. I hope it is I desperately hope it's from Nausicaa's perspective, because, well, I want a 16-year-old girl like fangirly diary entry type of thing. And I will mention for audiobook listeners, if you are following the path that I am and not reading the physical version, it's really interesting. There are two different people reading it. Very few things, especially of the shorter type of thing, split the duties. Most of the other adaptations I've read, it's one person. And I tried to notice if there was like a rhyme or reason between, okay, maybe this one guy will read everything for Telemachus and then the other person will do something else. And it kind of worked like that for a little bit, because the one guy read everything until it got to Nausicaa, and then the other guy took over. Which was interesting because it was also just like, but you're reading from a woman's perspective. Why didn't they just get a woman?
It's odd if you're switching characters. Why not have a female narrator for the girl?
But then the other ones, it seems that it looks like it's going to switch back to being the first guy, but he's not reading for Telemachus. It seems like he's going to go into chapter 10 in the Odyssey part. So I'm just confused as to why the switch. And so that's, just musings on like why I don't understand these switches. It's kind of jarring to hear. I listened to the first guy for like 7 chapters, man, and then I get a different person for 2, and then I'm going again. So yeah, so I'm interested to see how it ends, how it all ends. Again.
Well, thank you, Lexi, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you, audience, for listening along. I hope you have enjoyed it. I know we kind of took a couple of, I'd say, more divergent tangents than we normally do, but hopefully it was enjoyable regardless.
I feel like part of the reason people listen is for our banter and our weird musings.
There's a lot of banter.
And how our brains work in different ways. So, I think it'd be boring if we had like the same kind of thought patterns anyway. So no one would want that. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. But yeah, so this is what we thought of part 1. Join us next week for part 2, and we'll finish this shorter book. Yeah. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.